The Kate Daly Show starts now.
So let me explain. The problem is that Democrats, like me, we're not the brightest bulbs in the tanning bed. We can't always distinguish between reality and fiction. When Elon Musk posted Mr. Reagan's brilliant Kamala Harris parody video, I thought that was real. And so I realized, without laws governing what we are allowed to see and hear, how will we ever know what's really true? How would we know that COVID came from bat soup and Trump told everyone to inject bleach? How would we know that the COVID vaccines had 0 side effects and that masks were 100% effective? How would we know Kamala brilliantly invented her very own original idea, no tax on tips, or that I'm totally not gay? How would we know that Trump wrote Project 2025 or that Trump staged both of his assassination attempts? And how would we know that Trump is literally Hitler? Reincarnation is definitely a thing. Hitler died in 1945. Trump was born in 1946. Coincidence? I think not.
Oh, I love that. That was the Gavin gruesome parody, but maybe not a parody so much. Maybe actually true. I love it. And I love it. That was just a great answer to, to what he passed in California. The absurdity of you can't, these banning certain commercials, right? And banning certain things. So that was the, okay, we'll play this then. So I love that. Welcome back to the Kate Daly Show. So glad that you're with me. And I've got Mel Mattison, who's always a blast. I love Mel. Mel, how are you? Welcome to this hour. How are you?
I am doing well, and it's great to be back. It's been a little while, and I'm glad that you're feeling better as well. I know you were out for the count a little bit, so glad to have you back as well.
Thank you so much. How's the cleanup going in the location that you are on the East Coast with Helene?
Yes, I am based out of North Carolina. I'm in kind of the center of the state, so we had some flooding, but nothing like the western part of the state had. Where I'm at, everything is relatively back to normal and good, but there's still just tons of damage out there. The areas that were hit hard are areas I'm very familiar with, and there's just a lot of differences, I would say, especially for listeners that might be kind of in the western part of the United States, because a lot of the big federal areas, national forests and things in the western part of the United States, people don't live in them. What happened out here out east is because these areas were settled hundreds of years ago, a lot of communities are kind of grandfathered in, and there's literally, like, you drive through what seems like a wilderness area or a national forest area, and you think it's just all open land, and then all of a sudden you hit a small community in the mountains of 10 or 15 people that have been, people have been living there literally for hundreds of years. And so there's a lot of really disjointed communities that still don't have access. Bridges are still out. So there's a lot of suffering still going on out there, but I think that the people are doing their best to take care of themselves.
Yeah. And that's interesting. Communities kind of grandfathered in. That's an interesting thing to think about.
Well, they are. And that's why you don't have, like BLM land or wilderness designation where there's no roads. You don't have a lot of wilderness designations in North Carolina, simply because many of these areas were settled in the 16 and 1700s. And so by the time people like Teddy Roosevelt with the national parks and different, by the time the federal government came in to say, hey, we're claiming this as federal land, there were already communities there. And so there's a lot of communities that are really back in those hills in a way that you don't see much out west, because they simply claim that land to the federal government before people had time to develop communities at, the higher elevations or back in the mountains and hills. So you just have a lot of small communities that really are isolated right now, even 2-3 weeks later, because they're deep down back in there.
Wow. It reminds me sort of the, the Bundy Ranch and the letting go of, or at least going after some of the things and saying, okay, they're going to be let go, right? Let out of prison, and the case is going to go away, which shouldn't have even, they should not have even been incarcerated. But it really goes back to trying to hide the 1866 law that 11,000 acres of Nevada are not owned by the feds. So I just wonder how much more that goes on where it wasn't adopted by their constitution. So they didn't want anyone to realize this. And so they just basically went, okay, you're out of prison and we won't look at you guys anymore. That this is a non-case, but it's kind of interesting when it comes to land, right? And who owns what. I don't know. I always find it kind of fascinating. So
No,
had to
definitely.
ask.
And
Yeah.
a lot of this land is land, that the government would love to get their hands on too.
Right.
You have areas in these mountains. In North Carolina, there's a town called Spruce Pine where
Mm.
a certain type of quartz is
Yes.
mined that is necessary for like 95% of chips. You have different areas that weren't super severely affected by Helene, but just a little bit
Right.
to the east of the Appalachians in Kentucky, the eastern side of the mountains, where studies have shown like there's huge deposits of rare earth minerals and different things that just they're having trouble getting to, as I mentioned, because people actually own some of this land, and so you do wonder when you see these things happen, like it seems to work out a little bit that, oh, well, maybe these people won't be able to rebuild, or they won't be able to pay the flood insurance premiums that they'll need to, and it will give the government an opportunity to come in and clean some of this up. So I wouldn't be surprised to see, in the years to come, that a lot of this land winds up being owned or bought by either large corporations or the government for mineral resources, which is
Right.
very, very rich.
Or the government behind those corporations. So not exactly a private deal, but more government money behind it to look private.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Yes. Okay. So there was so much to talk about. I want to talk about rising debt, cost to service that debt. You've got to bring that up.
Yeah, I mean, so we run here in the U.S. on a fiscal year, meaning they account everything from October 1st to September 30th. So just a couple weeks ago, we finished that up, and so we finally get some of the first numbers on full year, and in the Congressional Budget Office released something on October 8th, which just showed exactly what's going on. And they showed that even though our revenues as a country increased by $500 billion, meaning we took in more in taxes, a ton more than last year, we actually had a huge, continuing to explode fiscal deficit. And when you drill into the details of the reporting and what's going on, and you say, well, where is all this extra tax money being spent? It's pretty clear it's going to basically just pay interest on the debt. And this is why I think, even though by measures that, let's say, Wall Street cares about, the economy is doing good. The average American is suffering, but by Wall Street measures, the economy is doing good. Stock market's doing well, GDP is doing well, and you wonder, why is the Federal Reserve cutting interest rates by 50 basis points? And I think the reason why Jerome Powell and the Fed felt the need to really slash interest rates is they're looking at the amount of money that we're now spending on servicing the public debt. So the largest outlay by far, the largest increase was interest on the public debt. So in 2023, we spent $710 billion, and last year we spent $950 billion,
Wow.
which is a 35% increase.
Yeah.
It's massive.
Yeah. Right.
And it goes ahead of defense. Department of DOD was $826 billion. So well over $100 billion more on the debt. And the only thing that's bigger in the whole budget is Social Security. That's the only thing. And there's nothing that increased more. There was, due to accounting, the Department of Education increased, but that was simply because the Supreme Court overruled the student loan forgiveness. And so they had taken $300 billion credit, they debited $300 billion to the Department of Education that they had to credit back to the Department of Education. And so it skewed some numbers. But the reality is that this interest on the debt is just getting truly unsustainable, where it's so high that the Federal Reserve, it doesn't matter how well or how poorly the economy is doing, they need to keep interest rates low, because if they keep the interest rates at this level, it's going to go up another 30-40% next year, because the debt has to be reissued. So the 5-year bonds that were issued 5 years ago in 2019 that were issued at 0.5%, they need to be reissued. That's trading at 4% now. all of this is adding to this cost. And so what we're seeing, which is really interesting, is the Federal Reserve cut interest rates, but the 10-year Treasury bond is at a higher yield, meaning the rates are going up on debt instead of down. And that's what you see in emerging market economies. That's what you see in places like Brazil or Colombia. It's a sign that investors are losing faith. And so we're really starting to head into this end game of this whole dollar debt spiral.
Right.
And, these are just signs of it. It's not here yet, but it's
a sign.
coming.
So these are things that you would see in those other countries. And you might want to say that once more for those that didn't catch that or in the car driving, the cost is rising on what, so that people can understand that this is not not usual, right, for America to have this happen.
No, it's not usual at all. And people look back and they look over time and they see at these emerging markets, countries like Argentina, Turkey, Colombia, Brazil, when do they have currency crisis? And normally a currency crisis starts to occur when what that country has to pay out, meaning non-discretionary type spending, starts to exceed what they're taking in tax receipts. And we are now at that point. And what I mean by non-discretionary spending is basically if you add up Social Security, Medicare, interest on the debt, you essentially need every dollar the U.S. government collects in taxes just to pay Medicare, Social Security, and interest on the debt. Everything else right now is being funded by new issuance of debt or deficits, basically. So the government's taking in $4 or $5 trillion, but they're spending $7 trillion. And every year we're now issuing $2 trillion in debt. So according to the CBO, just to give you the exact number, the debt last year is estimated to be 1.8 trillion. Okay, the deficit. So in other words, that's $2 trillion. Now, just to give you an example of how much that is, before the financial crisis, as recently as 2008, the entire balance sheet of, for example, the Federal Reserve of how much debt they had bought was $800 billion.
Right.
So we're talking like 225% of what it took this country 225 years to build up, and we're doing it in a matter of 12 months.
Wow. Be right back. More with the fantastic Mel Mattison. The book is Quaz, by the way. melmattison.com on The Kate Daly Show. Be right back.
Thanks for listening to The Kate Daly Show. All opinions expressed by the program